When you think about love, is it something that you think is closer to objectivity or subjectivity? Objectivity tends to be something that is clear cut, like logical, right? At least it's associated with what is logical, um, and even exact, I guess. An objective argument, right? Or something that is objectively true. But in reality, or more generally, to put it that way, objectivity relates to the object, right? Now, subjectivity, at least I associate it with what is like relative, what is very similar to relative, what is objective, right? Like less defined. But that's a really vague idea. Subjectivity actually more generally refers to a subject, right? Now, I believe love is subjective first and foremost. Um, it is really the idea of John Paul II, and we're going to read a section of his book right now. His book Love and Responsibility. It is the idea of John Paul II that love has a subjective profile, but that is very different from subjectivism in love, right? That is very different. The subjective profile of love is centered around, according to John Paul II, is centered around affectivity and even sensuality, and I guess pleasure, but just affectivity in general, which we're not necessarily talking about like sex right away, but it's like that side of the fence. Amorous lived experiences and erotic lived experiences. But even like small deeds of affectivity are part of the subjective profile of love, says John Paul II. Objectivity, or in this case the objective profile of love, is centered around the affirmation of the value of the person. That's it. That's pretty much it. And I want to contrast these two ideas. The subjective profile of love, in this case, in the philosophy of John Paul II, is not love. No. The subjective profile of love is closer to the material for love. In this sense, amorous lived experiences that are exterior are part of the material to grow love, to integrate love, but they are not love. The idea of John Paul II is that one must strive for achieving integration, not disintegration. I want to contrast the ideas of, and this is the way I put it. There's a difference between seeing love as a vice. I'm just saying, like, there's a difference between love as a vice and love as a virtue, right? Interesting juxtaposition. For real, satisfaction is not love. Sexual or emotional satisfaction. Because that lacks an act of benevolence. But why? Well, first and foremost, being satisfied emotionally does not imply an act of benevolence. But the idea here is that ultimately everything proceeds from a thorough understanding, a thorough comprehension, and affirmation of the value of the person. Because from the affirmation of the value of the person, the virtues of love proceed, I think, right? The subjective profile of love contains sensuality, contains affectivity, contains pleasure as a good, because it is a good, but not the greatest good. But the objective profile of love, which is centered around the affirmation of the value of the person, almost intrinsically demands an act of benevolence. So, from the affirmation of the value of benevolence, from the affirmation of the value of the person, we arrive at benevolence, we arrive at responsibility, we arrive at devotion, we arrive at compassion, we arrive at sacrifice, we arrive at selflessness, right? Because love is not selfish, but rather paradoxically selfless, right? And that's interior, all of that's interior. So we have this contrast, right? People say that it's hard to define love. You see romantic movies, most of it is, because that's the idea of a movie, it's about making you feel things, right? But it's often too centered around the subjective profile of love, and not always around the objective profile of love. Because the objective profile of love takes time, it's rather interior, so that's hard to represent in a movie. In a movie, it's easy to represent affectivity. But the true objective profile of love, that's in the interior. So, in a movie, it's easy to represent passion, but it's harder to represent true appreciation of the intrinsic value of the other person and true selflessness, right? I guess. Although I guess that a good movie would be able to actually convey that very well. Anyways, that's a topic for another day, maybe. So that's the idea: love as a vice and love as a virtue. There's a difference. It takes a mature will. That's the idea of Jean-Paul Sartre, that it takes an effort, like a conscious effort, right? To be like, because of activity, says Jean-Paul Sartre, and I should probably stop reading here the chapter, which I want to do, and comment along the way. Affectivity almost naturally leads towards pleasure, right? Or what? I think that's fair to say, actually. Yeah, affectivity leads naturally towards sensuality. That's the way to put it. Pleasure is not the word that I'm looking for, but it's related. But affectivity leads towards sensuality, and that not necessarily, of course, leads towards the integration of love per se. And so it takes like certain intentionality into what you're doing to help the spontaneity, which is part of feeling butterflies for someone. So like direct the material for love towards love and not towards the hedonization of love or the subjectivism of love, right? Because love is subjective, because it is about affirming the value of another person, it is about committing one's freedom to another person, and all those things are objective, very objective. Okay, 9 minutes. This turned out pretty long. I think that I'll try to make a 20-minute video, or less than 20 minutes. But bear with me, because we're going to read this, which is better than whatever I said. So, the section is subjectivism and egoism of the book Love and Responsibility. John Paul II says, he talks about, again, the subjective profile of love, which is centered around affections. He said that it's joined with reactions and deeds that create a stimulus. He talks about the stimulus, right? When we're thinking about the subjective profile of love, we're thinking about the senses. So a stimulus comes into place. And the stimulus that needs and demands speaks of a need of integration. Material for love, we aim to integrate it into love, because the material for love is not love yet. A correct incorporation, he says. He speaks of certain plasticity of human affection that we consciously may form with our will into what we decide, right? So it's not just hopefully works out. It is like hopefully we know how to love, right? You know, it's pretty basic stuff. Once you actually read this, like, then it's like, how did I think about it? So yeah, the integration of love demands that man consciously forms with his will all that the senses provide him with in the reactions of sensuality and affectivity and integration, so that thoroughly affirming, then we get at that, so that by thoroughly affirming the value of the person, he places all these on the level of a relation between persons and keeps it within the boundaries of a true union of persons, right? When I read this, I feel like you have one job. I mean, keeping it on the level of a relation between persons and within the boundaries of a true union of persons, because love is always a union of persons. That makes sense, and it makes even more sense if you contrast it with an emotional connection with an object of sexual use, right? There's a difference between an emotional connection with an object of sexual use. I mean, hopefully there's an emotional connection at least. But there's a difference between that. You can contrast that with placing your relationship in the level of persons and a true union of persons that thoroughly affirms the value of the person, right? There's a difference. If you want to achieve that, you're talking about the integration of love that demands that you consciously form with your will all that the senses provide you in the reactions of sensuality and affectivity. You know, yeah. Make those romantic moments worth it, I guess. And to not disintegrate it into anything that is worthless, but something that is quite worthwhile, right? That's another way to put it. Subjectivism, he says, differs fundamentally from subjectivity, from the subjective profile of every love. Every love has a subjective profile, and that's part of the beauty of it. It's beautiful. Just take advantage of it. Don't waste it. That's the idea. Subjectivity, right? He says subjectivity belongs to the nature of love, which concerns two subjects, an intersubjective relation, right? But that's the, it's subjectivity is part of love, but the subjectivism of love is not love at all. That's the idea. He puts it this way, better than me. Subjectivism is a distortion of the essence of love. It is such an overgrowth of the subjective moment that the objective value of love becomes partially or completely absorbed and lost in it, right? So there's the subjective profile of love, but it cannot be above the objective profile of love. Because the objective profile of love is about the affirmation of the value of the person, which is at the center of love. Yeah, he uses the word an overgrowth. Keep that word in mind. I'll come back to it. Yeah. He speaks of truth of affections. But he also says that there's a difference between the authenticity and subjective veracity of affections, which can be genuine. I'm not saying, hey, you may be using consciously, I'm using this person, right? It may not be conscious. You may be very authentic person. And it still be very uneducated in love, right? You can feel sincere affection. But there's a comment here by the translator of this version of Love and Responsibility, the latest translation. I'll put the name of this translator in the description maybe, but he says, it is not the strength, the power of conviction, or the authenticity of belief with which the given subject passes a judgment that determines the veracity of the judgment, right? It's not your conviction about a judgment, a sincere judgment, which determines the veracity of the judgment, right? The subject is the exclusive author of the judgment, but is not, however, the author of truth. What that means, I understand, is that sincere affection is not, like love yet. You can be months in love with a person, but it may be just like really sincere, genuine affection or affective deeds, but not really something that ever integrated into the objective profile of love. And that's the idea, because those are two different things. Are there middle grounds? I don't know, maybe, but here's the idea here is to differentiate concepts. But it's actually dangerous. That's the idea of Jean-Paul II. Because he says that some disintegration can take place. The actual lived experience can rise above all the remaining objective facts. He says that the value of affection itself, those awesome affective moments, right, start to determine the value of the act. What is the value of the act? The value of affection. A great kiss is beautiful. What is the value of a great kiss? The value of the affection? Or the value of the objective profile of love? It's kind of different. Again, we really think of material, and what good does it make to waste the material to grow love? Like, if it's because lack of education on these matters. But again, you can want to consciously turn the material of love into love, right? So that's why he speaks of a danger, because if you are unaware of this, without realizing it, you may not be careful, or at least consciously think about it, and then the value of affection starts to determine the value of the act, which is not love. Yeah, he says affection possesses only a subjective veracity. True affection can also infuse an act that is objectively not good. Right? True affection can also infuse an act that objectively is not good. He says that subjectivism of affection constitutes a wide gate. Oh, 20 minutes. Shit. Should I make this to 2 parts? Yeah. Okay. We'll cut this here and we'll continue. See you in the next video that I'll publish right away after this.